The air changes first. That is the thing you notice before your eyes have even caught up. The temperature drops, cool and even and dead still, and the sound of the world up top, the wind and the goats and the voices, just stops, as if someone shut a door on all of it. Which, in a moment, someone will. You are going down a staircase cut straight into the rock, and the steps are steep and worn smooth and barely wide enough for your shoulders, and the only light you have is a little clay lamp in your hand, a shallow bowl of oil with a burning wick throwing just enough glow to show you the next few steps and nothing beyond them. So you go down, and then you go down again, past a level of low doorways and rooms hollowed straight out of the stone, past another, and down again, the rock pressing in on both sides now, close enough to brush with your elbows. You are 10 meters beneath the surface, then 20, then deeper still, and the daylight is a memory. And then you reach the door, and it is not a door the way you know a door. It is a wheel of solid stone, a great disc as tall as a man, half a meter thick, weighing the better part of a ton, shaped like an enormous millstone sitting on its edge in a slot carved into the side of the passage. And as you and the crowd behind you press through the gap beside it, someone leans their whole weight into that stone and rolls it, and it grinds out across the passage and drops into place and seals it. With a low boom you feel in the rock all around you. There is a hole bored clean through the center of that stone. It is not decoration. It is so that the people on this side can see out and reach through if they have to. And here is the detail about that door that I want you to carry with you for the next half hour, because everything hangs on it. It can only be moved from the inside. Whoever is coming down the stair behind you cannot roll it back. You have not locked yourself in. You have locked the world out, and there are levels of this beneath you still. As many as 18 of them going down into the dark, into the rock. Stables, kitchens, wells, a church, and room on all those floors together for something like 20,000 people, a whole city. And if you stood on the green fields directly above it in the sunshine, you would see nothing. A few low hills, some holes in the ground you would take for wells, grass. Because the greatest thing these people ever built, they built so that you could not see it at all. Let me show you. My name is Dan. I move heavy things for a living. I am a structural engineer, 20-odd years of it, and when you strip my whole job right down to the bone, what I do is add. I add. I set a beam on top of a column and a floor on top of the beam and a wall around the floor, and I stack the whole lot up toward the sky, with the load running back down through everything I have piled up and into the ground. Building is stacking. That is the trade. You take material and you assemble it upward into a shape that was not there before, and the higher and the cleverer you stack it, the more we all agree to be impressed. A cathedral, a tower, a bridge. We measure a whole civilization mostly by how high it managed to reach. So the first time I properly understood what is buried under a quiet town in central Turkey, it did something strange to me, and I have not shaken it since. Because these people did the exact opposite of everything I do. They did not add a single thing. They did not stack one stone on top of another. They built one of the most astonishing structures of the entire ancient world, a structure that could hold a small town's worth of living human beings, with their animals and their food and their gods, and they built the whole of it by taking material away. They made their masterpiece out of the whole, out of absence, out of the space where the rock used to be. So let me hand you the brief, the way I would hand it to a client, and watch your face fall the way mine did. Here is the job. You may not build up not a wall, not a roof, not a tower, nothing that shows above the ground. Everything you make has to go down, carved out of the living rock by hand. It has to hold at a squeeze perhaps 20,000 people. It has to keep them and their livestock alive down there for weeks at a time, which means air, right down to the lowest floor, and clean water and food stores and somewhere to cook and somewhere to pray. It has to be sealable from the inside against anyone who comes looking. And the single most important design requirement of all, from the surface, it must be invisible. Nobody standing in the field above must be able to tell that beneath their boots is a city. That is the brief. And when I first really sat with it, as a man who does exactly this sort of impossible-looking work with $100 million of machinery at his back, I felt the way I always feel at these places, small and a little bit like a fraud, because they pulled it off by hand with no metal machines in the dark. Let me walk you down through it. First, where we are, because the where is half of how they did it, and you have to understand the rock before anything else makes sense. This is Cappadocia, in the middle of Turkey, Nevşehir province, if you want to find it on a map. And it is one of the strangest landscapes on Earth. Millions of years ago, the volcanoes here buried the whole region in thick blankets of ash, and that ash settled and hardened into a rock called tuff. Now, tuff is the key to this entire story, so let me put my engineer's hat on for 1 second. Tuff is soft. When it is freshly exposed, you can cut it, scrape it, hollow it out with a hand tool, with a pick, a chisel of harder stone, an antler, a shovel. It carves almost like very firm cheese. But then here is the magic of it. Once tuff is exposed to the air, it slowly hardens on the surface into a tough protective skin. So it is soft enough to dig and then strong enough to stand, which means you can hollow out a room, a passage, a whole stack of rooms, and the ceiling will hold over your head without a single beam or a single column. For a man whose entire career is about propping ceilings up, that is close to witchcraft. Up top, wind and water have carved this same soft rock into a forest of weird tapering spires. People call them fairy chimneys and rolling pale hills and dry valleys. It looks like another planet. And for thousands of years, the people who lived here looked at that soft, carvable, self-supporting stone and did the obvious thing. They dug into it. They carved houses into cliff faces and churches into hillsides and pigeon lofts into the spires. And somewhere along the line, someone had a far bigger, far darker idea. If you can carve a room, you can carve 100 rooms. And if you can carve them downward, out of sight, then when the bad times come, and in this part of the world, for thousands of years, the bad times always came, you and everyone you love can simply vanish into the ground and pull the door shut. Now here is the part I love most, the part that tells you just how completely they succeeded at the one requirement that mattered, being invisible, because we very nearly never found it. The story goes that in 1963, a man in the town of Derinkuyu was renovating his house. Ordinary job, knocking a wall through, and behind the wall, instead of more house or more earth, there was a gap, a space, a passage leading off into the dark. He had been living all his life on top of a doorway into an entire hidden city and never known it was there. Nobody had. The passage he broke into led down and down, into level after level of carved rooms and stairways and shafts and tunnels, a network so vast that, 60 years later, we are still not certain we have mapped all of it. It was excavated and studied and finally opened to the public in 1969, and today you can walk down through about 8 of its levels. About 8. Because below the part that is safe and lit for visitors, it keeps going. As many as 18 levels in total, some people say, reaching something like 60 meters straight down the depth of a 20-story building, except every floor of it is underground. And I want to be honest with you, The way I am going to be honest with you all the way through this. Those numbers, the 18 levels, the 60 meters, the 20,000 people are estimates, and you will see them argued over. What is not in doubt is that it is enormous, that it is deep, and that a whole man's lifetime was spent living directly on top of it without a clue. That is how well they hid a city. So let us go down into it properly now, floor by floor, the way you would if you were sheltering here, and I will show you the engineering as we pass it, because it is the engineering that turns this from a big scary hole into one of the cleverest things I have ever stood inside. The upper levels nearest the surface are the ones with the heavy daily work, the parts that need to be close to the entrances, close to the animals, close to the air. As you descend, the character of the place changes. It gets more sheltered, more precious, more hidden. The lowest levels are where you put the things and the people you least want an enemy ever to reach. It is, if you think about it, a building turned completely upside down. In my world, the penthouse is at the top. The higher you go, the safer and grander and more expensive it gets. Here it is the reverse. The deeper you go, the safer you are. The most protected place in the whole city is the bottom of it, and connecting all of it, threading between the levels, is a system of narrow, low, twisting passages and steep staircases, deliberately narrow, deliberately low, so that you have to stoop and go single file. That is not bad design. That is the design. An intruder who does get in cannot rush. He has to bend double and shuffle forward one man at a time, into the dark, not knowing what is around the next turn. Everything about the way you move through this place was shaped by people thinking hard about the day someone hostile would try to move through it too. Now the first question any engineer asks, the moment you say the words 20,000 people, 60 meters underground, is the question that would kill everyone in an afternoon if you got it wrong. Air. How do you breathe? You cannot put 20,000 people and their animals and their cooking fires and their oil lamps into a sealed hole in the ground and expect them to live. The lamps alone would eat the oxygen. The fires would fill the place with smoke. The carbon dioxide would pool in the low rooms and quietly suffocate everyone in them. Ventilation is not a nice-to-have here. It is the whole ball game. And the way they solved it is, to me, the single most beautiful thing in the entire city. They cut vertical shafts. Over 50 of them have been found, narrow chimneys of empty space driven straight down through all the levels. From the surface, right to the depths. Warm, stale, used air rises up some of them and out. Cool, fresh air is drawn down others. And because the temperature deep in the rock stays almost constant all year round, the difference between the cool depths and the warmer surface sets up a gentle, steady draft that moves itself, with no fan, no bellows, no power forever. It is a natural chimney effect, engineered on purpose at the scale of a city. Stand at the bottom of Derinkuyu, 60 meters down, and there is a faint, cool breath of moving air on your face. They built that. And then they did the thing that made me sit back in my chair, because it is the kind of double-duty detail that only comes from generations of hard, patient thinking. Some of those same vertical shafts do not just carry air. They go deeper than the lowest floor, down to the water table, and they double as wells. So the shaft brings you air and water in one cut. And this is the clever, ruthless part. The wells were designed so they could only be reached from inside the city. An enemy laying siege up on the surface could not reach down and poison the water or block it. The people below had their own protected spring in the rock. Air that moves itself. Water you control. Once you have those two things sealed away from anyone above you, you can outlast almost anything. You can simply wait in the dark, in the cool, until whoever came for you gives up and goes home. So you can breathe and you can drink. Now you have to live, for weeks, maybe longer. And this is where Derinkuyu stops being a bunker and becomes a genuine city with everything a life needs, all of it carved out of the dark. Near the top, where the air is best and the ramps are widest, are the stables. They brought the animals down. The livestock, your wealth, your milk, your meat. Your muscle came underground with you because leaving them on the surface meant losing them, and because you might be down there a long time. You can still see the mangers and the tethering holes carved into the walls. Below the stables are the storerooms, room after room after room of them, for grain and dried food, the pantry of a city, because a siege is really just a waiting contest and the side with more food wins. And they did not just store food, they processed it underground in the dark. There are wine presses and oil presses cut into the rock stone basins and channels where grapes and seeds were crushed and the juice ran off to be collected. Think about that for a moment. They were not just hiding. They were carrying on, making wine, pressing oil. There are communal kitchens, and you can tell they are kitchens without anyone having to tell you, because the ceilings above the hearths are still stained black soot, from cooking fires, baked into the rock, centuries and centuries old, still there. And the smoke from those fires was vented away cleverly, spread out and released far from the kitchens, sometimes through disguised outlets on the surface, so that an enemy up top would not see a column of cooking smoke rising out of an empty field and think, there is a hidden kitchen under here, there are people down there. Even the smoke was made invisible. There are chapels along the way, small places to pray. And then, deep down on one of the lower levels, there is the room that stops people in their tracks, and rightly so. It is a church, a large one, carved in the shape of a cruciform church with a long barrel-vaulted ceiling arching overhead, all of it hollowed out of the solid rock. A place of worship, big enough for a congregation, 60 meters underground in a city with no sky. When people first come upon that space, they go quiet, because you suddenly understand that whoever hid down here did not only mean to survive down here. They meant to keep being fully, completely themselves down here, to keep their faith, hold their services, marry and mourn and pray in the dark out of sight for as long as it took. This was not a panic room. It was a whole life, folded away underground and ready to be lived. And now let me come back to that stone door from the very start, because it is the piece of pure defensive engineering that ties the whole city together, and the more you understand it, the better it gets. At key points throughout Derinkuyu, at the entrances to levels, at the mouths of important passages, sit these enormous circular stone doors. Great discs of harder stone, like a millstone, stood on its edge, up to 1.5 meters across, half a meter thick, weighing anything from a few hundred kilograms to close to a ton. Each one lives in a carved slot or channel beside the passage. When there is no threat, it sits rolled back out of the way and you walk straight past it. When the alarm comes, riders on the horizon, dust on the road, an enemy in the district, a handful of people put their shoulders to that stone and roll it out across the passage, and it drops into a recess on the far side, and now that corridor is blocked by a ton of rock. And here is the genius of it, the part I keep coming back to. The door can only be operated from the inside, from the enemy's side, out in the passage. That stone is a smooth, seamless, immovable wall of rock with a small hole in the middle, a hole through which the defenders can see and reach, and the attacker cannot get any purchase, any grip, any leverage to move it. You would need a battering ram in a corridor so narrow you cannot even swing your arms. So they seal one level and retreat to the next, sealing that one too, drawing any attacker deeper and deeper into a pitch-black maze of ever-narrowing tunnels, each one blocked behind them, each one a killing funnel, while the people fall back toward the protected depths where the air moves and the water waits. Every single thing about this city was designed around one grim, brilliant idea. Make yourself impossible to reach, and simply outlast the danger. So who built this? And here I have to slow right down and be careful, because this is exactly the kind of question where a good story wants to run ahead of the honest answer, and I promised you the honest one. The truthful answer is that we are genuinely not certain, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. What the excavation record and the broad scholarly consensus point to is something like this. The soft rock of Cappadocia has been carved by people for a very long time, and the deepest, oldest parts of Derinkuyu were most likely first dug a very long time ago. Indeed, one leading view credits the Phrygians, an ancient people of Anatolia, cutting the first levels somewhere around the 8th or 7th century before the Common Era. That is roughly 2,500 years ago, and then some. Some researchers argue for even older beginnings, others are more cautious. You should hear the honesty in that. When I tell you 8th century BC, I am handing you the strongest current reading of contested evidence, not a date carved in stone. The dating of Derinkuyu is an open, argued-over question, and anyone who tells you they know for certain who first swung a pick down there is selling you something. What is far clearer is what happened later, because the city was not built once. It was dug and deepened and extended over many centuries, by wave after wave of people who needed exactly what it offered, a place to disappear. Its greatest expansion came in the Byzantine era, and its most famous residents were early Christians. This was a dangerous frontier, and for these communities the underground cities were salvation. They hid down here from persecution, and later, for centuries, they hid from raids sweeping up out of the south. When Arab armies rode through Cappadocia, whole villages would vanish underground into Derinkuyu, and into its sister cities roll the stone doors shut, and wait out the storm in the cool dark, breathing air the rock moved for them, drinking from wells no enemy could reach. And here is a fact that gives you the true scale of it. Derinkuyu does not stand alone. It is linked by long tunnels, miles of them, to other underground cities nearby, such as Kamakli. A whole hidden landscape, beneath the visible one, connected underground, so that people could move between refuges without ever showing their faces to the sky. And this is the point in every one of these where I stop being an engineer for a second and just stand there, because this is where Derinkuyu turned my whole trade inside out. Every wonder I have ever shown you, everything my profession celebrates, points up. It reaches. A pyramid, a cathedral, a great statue on a hill, the achievement is a thing that stands proud against the sky, a thing you can see from miles away, a thing that says, "We were here, look what we made, remember us." That is what a monument is. It is a shout. Derinkuyu is the opposite of a monument in every single way. There is no skyline, there is no facade, there is nothing to photograph from a distance, nothing that catches the sun, nothing that says we were here. The entire achievement is a shape carved into negative space, a masterpiece made of the rock they took out and carried away, an enormous, intricate, life-sustaining absence. These people did not build a thing that shouts across the centuries. They built a thing whose entire purpose, whose crowning genius, was that you could stand right on top of it and never know it was there. And once that lands, you cannot unsee it. We are so trained to admire what reaches up that we very nearly walked straight over the top of one of the great engineering feats of the ancient world because it refused to reach up. It reached down. It did not want to be seen. Its makers poured the same brilliance a pharaoh poured into a pyramid into the exact opposite goal. Not permanence and glory in the sky. Invisibility and survival in the ground. A whole civilization's worth of cleverness, spent on the art of disappearing. My intern Priya did the thing she always does, which is walk straight past all my lovely engineering to the part that actually matters. I was showing her the ventilation shafts, going on about the natural chimney effect, thoroughly pleased with myself, and she looked at the whole cross-section of the city and went quiet and then said, "Dan, they built somewhere for the animals and somewhere to make wine, and a church with a proper vaulted ceiling. That is not what you build if you are just running away for the afternoon. That is what you build if you are expecting to have to hide for the rest of your life." And she was right, and it changed the whole place for me. My foreman Mike, meanwhile, looked at a ton of stone door rolled across a corridor you cannot even swing your arms in, sealed from a side no attacker can reach, and just nodded slowly and said, "Now that is a lock." And he is right too. It is the best lock I have ever seen. It is a lock the size of a door, made of the same rock as the wall, that a whole town could hide behind and simply wait. So let me bring this back around to you, because I did not walk you 60 meters down into the dark just to be impressed by an old hole in the ground. We measure civilizations by what they build up, by what reaches for the sky. We put the tall things on the money and the postcards and the lists of wonders, the towers, the temples, the statues on the hills, because reaching up is how we have decided greatness looks. And it is a fair measure, most of the time. But Derinkuyu asks a harder question, and it is one I cannot get out of my head. What if, sometimes, the deepest achievement of a people is not the thing they built to be seen, but the thing they built to survive? What if the truest measure of how clever, how determined, how utterly unwilling to be erased a people were, is not the monument they raised into the light, but the refuge they carved into the dark, for the days when the safest thing in the whole world to be was invisible? These builders were not weak. Hiding was not surrender. Hiding was the plan. They looked at a world that kept sending armies over the hill, and instead of building higher walls to be knocked down, they built a whole city where a wall could not follow, and then they made it disappear. And here is the mirror I want you to actually sit in, because it is not really about them. If the surface of your life stopped being safe, if you had, this week, to take everything that truly mattered and put it somewhere no one could reach it, and simply wait for the danger to pass, what would you carry down into the dark with you? Not what would you grab. What would you decide was worth keeping a whole civilization alive for? Because that is the real question Derinkuyu answers on your behalf. These people, when they went into the ground, did not just take grain and water. They took their animals and their wine and their kitchens, and right down at the bottom of everything, they carved a church. They brought their whole selves underground. They refused to become smaller than they were just because they had to hide. And I think that, far more than the 60 meters or the 20,000 people, is the thing worth carrying back up into the sunlight with you. So tell me down in the comments and I read them, all of them. First, before today, had you ever even heard of Derinkuyu, or is this the first you are learning that there are whole cities hidden under those quiet fields in Turkey? I genuinely want to know how far this story has traveled. And second, the real one. If you had to disappear underground and wait out a danger for weeks, what is the one thing you would carry down with you that is not food and not water, the thing that would keep you feeling like you in the dark? Tell me. I will be reading. I am going to head back to my own site, where I will try to explain to Mike that a people with no machines out-engineered our entire industry, by building nothing at all, by building, brilliantly, an absence. And he will tell me that is all very nice, but he still cannot get a delivery of blockwork through the gate without a forklift and 2 lads off sick. And Priya's point, that they built for a lifetime of hiding and not an afternoon of running. I am going to keep chewing on for a while, because I think it is the whole thing. If standing 60 meters down in the dark, in a city built to vanish, no monument, no skyline, just people cleverer than the empty field above them did something to you, then subscribe and come back, because next time I have got another thing that is still standing, or in this case still hiding and still showing us up. My name is Dan. Mind the load. And the next time someone tells you greatness only ever reaches for the sky, tell them about the city that went the other way straight down into the rock, out of sight, and outlasted everyone who ever came looking for it.